The message today is to explain what phenology is, why it matters, and how you can start making some truly useful scientific observations with nothing more than your device or a camera and your backyard. So, what is phenology? Well, for starters, it has to do with life cycles. No, not that kind. Okay, that's better. We're talking about the life cycles of plants and animals. But it's a bit more complicated than that. Phenologists, and those are just the people who study phenology, are specifically interested in the timing of those life cycle stages. So in other words, they would want to know when the tadpoles hatch from the eggs, when the caterpillars start to pupate, when the plant's flower actually opens up. Phenologists spend a lot of time observing and recording exactly when those various species reach those life cycle checkpoints. So, phenology is concerned with the exact timing of life cycle stages. Hopefully that much is clear now. But why? Why is that important? What is it that they hope to learn? What do you think? Well, go ahead and press pause if you'd like and take a guess. So, the big reason is that the timing of life cycle events can be a very good indicator of changes in the environment. That's why phenology is such a useful science, particularly now. That also gives us the last missing piece for our working definition for phenology, which is the study of the timing of life cycle events and how they are affected by changes in the environment. So now you know what phenology is, but there's more. One of the biggest problems that phenologists face is that phenology hasn't really been around that long. That means there's a great lack of historical data to work with, and that makes it harder to identify longer-term patterns and trends. But they did get lucky in certain instances, because it turns out that there were actually some people doing exactly what phenologists do, observing plants and animals very closely and documenting their life cycle stages. They just didn't know that what they were doing was someday going to be called phenology. They were just being curious humans. And a few of them, it turns out, were kind of famous. Thomas Jefferson was one of these curious humans. The observations he made at Monticello and elsewhere go back as far as the late 1700s and have proven very useful to phenologists. And then there's Henry David Thoreau. Now, in the 1850s, good old Thoreau famously ditched his family and his home and spent a year living in a homemade cabin by the shores of Walden Pond. He took highly detailed notes on everything that was happening around him, and those notes have proven exceptionally valuable. In fact, using Thoreau's records, modern-day phenologists have been able to determine that some of the very same species he observed are now starting to grow 3 weeks earlier in the spring than they used to. 3 weeks? That's a pretty big change. However, just to make things more complicated, they also learned that some other species didn't seem to change at all, while others still fell somewhere in between. So, you might be wondering, what gives? Why would some plants change while others didn't? You might also be wondering if it's even a bad thing that some plants are growing 3 weeks earlier. You might think winter is too long as it is. Those are all great questions, and unfortunately, there are no simple answers. Phenologists don't fully understand why some species of plants have adapted to changes in their environments, while others seem slower to or don't seem to at all. There's just too much missing information. But anyway, the difference in how fast plants, and animals too, adapt to changes in their environment exposes another huge challenge. And that's because in nature, timing is everything. Let me give you an example from right here in the Sonoran Desert. This is a saguaro. It's a giant cactus, perfectly adapted for long hot summers and small amounts of precipitation. It's an absolutely iconic desert plant, worthy of our admiration and adoration. This, on the other hand, is a white-winged dove. So, other migratory birds, animals, and even a lot of people leave when it starts getting warm around here. They go to cooler climes and higher elevations, but not white-winged doves. They actually come to the Sonoran Desert in late spring, and they stay right through the summer. In other words, they're only here for the hottest, driest part of the year. So, why do they do it? Well, because they're crazy, that's why. Okay, there is one other reason. This guy. Saguaros start blossoming in late April or May. The white-winged doves, they've arrived by then. They're just waiting for those millions of saguaro blossoms to open up all across the desert. They feast on the pollen the flowers produce, fattening up, building their nests, laying their eggs. In June, just about everything around here has dried up in the blazing heat, And just as those eggs start hatching, the saguaro's fruit is also growing ripe. White-winged doves devour the fruit and they feed it to their young. For a time, it's just about all they eat. And for thousands of years, that's been how the next generation of white-winged doves have been raised. Now, imagine that in response to changes in the environment, the saguaros begin to bloom earlier and fruit earlier. But the white-winged dove, for whatever reason, doesn't or can't adapt. When they arrive, will there be enough pollen left to give them the enormous amount of energy they need to build nests and produce healthy eggs? Will there be enough fruit left to feed the chicks and sustain them until they're old enough to fly and find their own food? Oh, and by the way, if the doves aren't there to help pollinate the flowers, will the saguaros still produce the same amount of fruit? And if the doves aren't there to eat the fruit and help distribute the seeds, how will that affect the saguaros? So you see, timing is everything, and it can mean the difference between life and death for a species. Close interconnected relationships like that exist all over in nature. Insects, birds, fish, animals, plants. If one starts adapting by changing the timing of its life cycle stages, but the other doesn't, or does, but at a different rate, it creates what's called a phenological mismatch. Plants and animals that have coexisted for thousands of years might find that they, or a partner they depend on, can't keep up with the rate of change going on around them. And that could have big implications, not only for things like saguaros and white-winged doves, but also the crops that farmers grow, the orchards where fruit and nuts grow, and the rangeland where our cattle graze. I say may, because phenologists just don't know enough about what's changing, how much, and how fast. To do that, they have to gather vast amount of data about what's happening right now across a wide range of species and locations. And that's where we, you and me, right here in our own backyards, come in. All it takes is a smartphone or a computer and a camera, plus your own senses, and an outdoor location like a backyard, and anyone can get involved in making their own observations. There are a few different apps and websites available, which I'll post in the comments, but for now I'm just going to focus on an app called Nature's Notebook. It is designed for use not only by professionals, but also those of us who just want to help. It provides step-by-step instructions for making quality, scientifically useful observations. Nature's Notebook also offers helpful tutorials and ID guides and all kinds of great information to help you get started. When you download an app like Nature's Notebook and start making your own observations, you're helping to answer some of the great scientific questions of our time. How are the changes in our environment affecting the plants and animals right here where we live? How much and how fast are things changing for our local plants and animals? What is happening to the biodiversity around us? Is it growing, shrinking, staying the same? Whether you believe in climate change or not doesn't really matter. You don't have to rely on what others are saying. You can get out there and find out for yourself. I do want to warn you about one thing, though. Don't be too surprised if, when you start looking a little more closely, you start to notice things you never noticed before. In fact, you might be amazed to discover what's going on inside the boundaries of your own little habitat. You might come away with a lot of questions. If you do, good for you. That's great. Being curious is a great feeling, don't you think? And as you start seeking answers to your questions, don't be too surprised if you start to become a little more aware of your environment and feel a little more connected to nature. I think that's a pretty good feeling too. Okay, so we learned some stuff, right? We learned what phenology is, what phenologists do. We learned how our changing environment is changing life cycle stages for some, but not all, species of plants and animals, and how that can create problems within an ecosystem. And we learned that science needs our help, and that helping really only requires a smartphone or a computer and camera, a curious human, and a backyard. And remember, by backyard, we really mean any outdoor space where plants and animals live. All right, time for today's challenge. Today, I am challenging you to download an app like Nature's Notebook. Open it, play with it, watch a few tutorials if you'd like, and then get started. Make your first observation. You know, observations are a lot like that old saying about potato chips. It's really hard to have just one. Now, when you download that app, make sure to let me know by posting in the comments or send me a tweet at #WaywardNaturalist. And when you make your first set of observations, make sure you let me know that too, again, by leaving a comment or tweeting me. And if you have any questions or you'd like to know more, same thing. The magic screen is showing some phenological related links, and I'll post them in the comments as well. I want to thank you for spending some time with me today. I'll be monitoring this YouTube page for at least the next 2 weeks, so again, don't forget to send me those messages and let me know what you're doing. Okay, that's about it. Hey, since you already have your device, and you are already out in your backyard, why not start right now? Go ahead, get out there, go explore your backyard. Thanks again. See you soon.